Every parent has a right to ask, what is the standard? So underperforming in comparison to what? Like I'm so concerned about standards, like suggesting that a child from the inner city of some city is going to be on the same page as a kid in rural Nebraska and a kid from a really wealthy suburb of, New York City. That is just not fair at all. So we have a right to also ask, how are you comparing my kids? What are you comparing them to? Apples to oranges or apples to apples?
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, there's disappointing data that shows that the U.S. has a long road ahead of itself, really in bringing back students from pre-pandemic learning progress levels in specifically math and reading. That's according to a new study that was released by an assessment provider in the NWEA. The average student will need about 4.8 additional months of schooling in reading and 4.3 months in math to catch up to pre-pandemic achievement levels. And although there have been many hopeful signs of learning progress and some different state test results, the NWEA found that there's a gap in reading and math progress that's actually widening in grades 4 through 8. Grade 3 was the only grade that was examined that showed progress in shrinking the achievement gap. So, Dr. Kathy, this is just, I feel like, a little bit of a reality for us. And I wanted to ask you, when we hear this data, I think as parents, we kind of can take it on as our responsibility, or we can point fingers at the school and say, man, these schools really aren't doing their job. Whose responsibility is it for us to bring back students from the COVID pandemic stunted learning experience?
I'm glad that we're talking about this because I've been really concerned about data that suggests that we are currently in the largest academic delay that our country has known. And what I would say, which might surprise people, is that students are responsible, right? Like that the parents are wondering, is it my job? And the teachers are certainly, is it my job? It is the students' job to learn. It's parents and teachers who teach. We have got to help students be motivated. We've got to help students understand that learning is their life. That's a biblical proverb, that without learning, they will not accomplish what their creator intended for them to do with their lives or become with their identity. So ideally, that students choose to sit down, pay attention, study. They're not afraid of effort. We take away tech so that they're more willing to apply themselves. And then obviously, school administrators have got to look at the way that teachers are using their time. We've got to make sure that we have alternative curricula for people who don't learn in maybe a word and logic smart, kind of a public school way, if you will. So lots of shared responsibilities here, but I'd really say we've got to help our students take seriously their opportunity to become who they were created to be.
Yeah, I love that, Dr. Kathy. I do agree with you. I didn't think I would, but I do agree with you that there's really that students have a responsibility in this too. But I wanted to ask a little bit of a different question too with this, because when we follow maybe the chart of history and we see education engagement, there's oftentimes these, I don't know if they'd be like upsets kind of on the curve of learning, if I want to put it that way, right? World War I would be a time period, or maybe even like during the Depression, maybe World War II would be another time period, or we have these different kind of engagements, maybe in the 90s where we actually see an increase in a lot of education spending that we have seen kind of a rise, or we're kind of like charting things a little bit uniquely. I want to ask this, when we look at the COVID learning pandemic, stuntedness, is that just a blip on the radar of learning? Is there a need for us to really adjust how we're educating kids? And now there really needs to be really a hyper course correction on our approach to kind of learning for our kids and stepping alongside them. What do you think this whole kind of learning engagement right now that we're seeing specifically around this topic, what does that really mean in the course of learning history for kids across the board?
Really interesting question. The most dangerous thing to do maybe would be to lower our standards and say there's no deficit. That's not a healthy choice. So, and I would say that we need to make sure that we're positioned to not blame educators. Most teachers are working their tails off to do the very best that they can with crowded classrooms. And what we have, Wayne, are children with mental health issues that we've never had before, children with maybe parental dysfunction, if I can be brave to say that, family brokenness, so that Motivation isn't what it once was. Family support at home for reading and rehearsal and practice. And remember, you have a test tomorrow. We have less of that going on. And so I wonder if it is okay to say, to an extent, I don't know, I'm really struggling. Like, do I want to say it's okay to lower standards? I'm not a fan of that. And yet I want teachers to have the support they need so that they can be successful, so that children are not always feeling like they're underperforming. That's not a dangerous belief to have.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I think that can be really a challenge. I think that when we look at especially these, I don't know, this phrase underperforming, it can be something that maybe inspires us, or we can use it to maybe inspire kids. But I think sometimes it can also then be a little bit of a, I don't know, an identity or a way that people look at ourselves, right? Or a generation looks at itself. Like, we were the COVID era generation. And because of that, we have now been found to be an underperforming generation. How should parents respond when our kids are maybe underperforming according to different benchmarks? And how can we, you know, and is that a phrase that we should be using, or are there better phrases that we should use when we're talking about maybe a learning gap or different things like that?
Yeah, really good questions. What do I think parents, how do I think parents should respond? Well, we better not be happy about it, and we better not be complacent, because that would not be wise. Children will continue potentially down a slippery slope, and again, may not develop into the people that God created for them to be. So what can we do? Are there different curricula that we could recommend? Are there different, are they getting enough sleep? Is their diet appropriate so that they can stay energized throughout the day? We can be asking different questions. We need to sit down maybe with teachers and say, talk to us about our Bethany and our Brian. What do you see happening here at school? How can we support them so that academics become an easier thing for them to do? I would also say that every parent has a right to ask, what is the standard? So underperforming in comparison to what? I'm so concerned about standards, like suggesting that a child from the inner city of some city is going to be on the same page as a kid in rural Nebraska and a kid from a really wealthy suburb of, New York City. That is just not fair at all. So we have a right to also ask, how are you comparing my kids? What are you comparing them to? Apples to oranges or apples to apples?
As Dr. Kathy was talking today, I was reminded of a passage that comes out of John chapter 1, and I'll begin reading at verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one whom I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.' Out of his fullness we have all received grace, in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses, and grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father. He has made him known." I thought of this passage partly because of the dynamic of what it means to be in a time and a place. We're in a time and a place, and our kids are in a time and a place. And we can often gauge or assess this time and place and how we're doing in this time and place based on things in the past, or based on trajectories or things that we want to do in the future. And we forget what it looks like to fully live in a time and a place, and to realize that there is grace in this place. There's grace to understand what God is doing in this moment. I think what John does here, especially through the first chapter of his gospel, is to show that there is a specialness to Jesus coming to the people that he came to. And it was really a graciousness. It was an opportunity for Jesus to communicate who he is, who God is, to a people maybe who weren't ready, or maybe didn't deserve it in some capacities or concepts that we might have in the outside world, outside of that time and place. But nonetheless, God comes, and God comes in a really powerful way and communicates himself in really dynamic areas and aspects of life. I think that for our kids today, maybe we need to help them fully embody what it looks like to be in this place, knowing the traditions and the trajectories that they're having to bear, especially inside of academia. Maybe the biggest and brightest light that we can give to our kids is to help them understand that almost no one is prepared for the time and place that they're in. It's that by the grace of God that He holds back darkness to allow us to see His amazing and beautiful light. Maybe our calling for our kids in this moment is to drive them to see that light in really profound and powerful ways. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, this daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. Thanks for listening today, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.